we reached a place where there were 3,000 experiments running in a particular sandbox at a particular time. So we have built generative AI solutions that are cutting edge. But eventually, we have seen no adoption. And if we do not have any adoption, eventually it becomes yet another experimentation. So I've seen people thinking of generative AI as a magic wand where it can fix things where people do not know what's broken. Generative AI is the first technology in my mind in human history where it has been personally adopted first, then be adopted in a corporate world, right?
You're listening to Data Analytics Chat, where data meets career.
Almost every organization today is experimenting with generative AI, but very few are seeing meaningful impact at scale. The hardest part isn't the technology, it's the work behind the scenes, data foundations, operating models, and how decisions get made. In today's episode of Data Analytics Chat, I'm joined by Nayan Paul, who's the Managing Director for Chief Generative AI Centre of Excellence at Accenture. And today we'll discuss what it really takes to adopt generative AI inside an organisation, what separates experimentation from impact, where companies get stuck, and what leaders should prioritise over the next 6 to 12 months. Nayan, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for hosting me, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. So I guess, Nayan, before we dive in, do you want to give listeners a quick introduction to who you are and the work you're leading today?
Absolutely. My name is Nayan Paul. I'm based out of US. And for me, generative AI has been a very organic growth. 5 years ago, my organization opened up the Center of Excellence as a global entity. And as a part of this CAV, as a part of a global organization, I was supposed to understand, adopt, and help my customers bring generative AI. So for me, I have three ways that I contribute as a part of generative. One is being part of a consulting work. I work with my customers. I try to understand their North Star vision. I try to understand their gaps. I try to understand what it can take for them, like you said, to move from an experimentation mindset to a productionized mindset. Two, I work with my products, teams. I work with my partners to understand what it means to build solutions, jumpstart kits, frameworks, the entire scaffolding bit. Because when we are talking about enterprise adoption, when we are talking about scalability, it is very important to do it right and do it in a repeatable way. We talk about building the right foundation. We talk about how generative AI needs to be designed in a way that we are not just chasing use cases and demos, we are chasing outcomes. So what it means to build those foundational capabilities. And three, because of how we are working very closely with our partners, it's about aligning our roadmap to the roadmap of our partners. What are, for example, Microsoft offering, AWS offering, GCP offering, what is NVIDIA offering, or how does Accenture, we are incorporating those understandings, incorporating those newness into our storyline, into our adoption, and how can we bring the latest thinking to our customers. So this is my day to day. This is how we have approached generative AI, right from, like you said, change management to having ownership to ensuring that we are thinking about the bigger picture, what comes and not.
But just so the listeners know, obviously, so are you specialised in one industry, Accenture, or is it across the board?
So within Accenture, we have multiple groups. However, my group, as I was talking about, is part of Center of Advanced AI. So Center of Advanced AI is a very horizontal entity. We are supposed to be the tip of the sphere where we are supposed to understand, incorporate, and imbibe what is the latest and greatest technology offering. So my team and I, we specialize mostly across domains, across verticals. We work with our functional leads. We work with our domain experts, the subject matter experts, but we bring in the technology bits. We understand what is the latest offering, what it means to scale, what it means to secure. We talk about responsible AI, security, safety breaks. So we will bring in mostly the horizontal technology. We talk about scalability and adoption, and others that we work with, like our business partners, our SMEs, our subject domain experts. They will bring in the functional knowledge. So together we will solve problems for our customers.
Brilliant. So you have a blend of use cases, which would be great for the listeners today. And I guess before we move on to the data topic, has it been an experience that you've gone through that's most shaped how you approach leading AI initiatives in organizations today?
100%. Like, it has been a growth cycle. It has been a lot of lessons learned for us. I remember 5 years ago when we started off this journey, our intention was, how do we ensure that we are educating people? So we created our own sandboxes. We actually advertised, we actually put in a lot of money where we asked our account teams, like we have multiple account teams. We asked our account teams to onboard into these sandboxes. We provided tenancy, we provided Azure services. We were early on bringing in LLM models. We were exposing those LLM models, and we are requesting all these account teams to grow and experiment. So the initial days, it was all about getting familiar, ensuring that people are not looking away, giving them a safe space, giving them all the right tools and technologies, giving them the right support to ensure that people can bring in their thought process, they can bring in their ideas and just experiment, right? So we focused on ensuring that just keep on experimenting. Whatever thoughts you have, irrespective of whether these outcomes are going to add value or not, just experiment. And we reached a place where there were 3,000 experiments running in a particular sandbox at a particular time. So what it did was we ensured that different account teams who are working with their respective clients, they were able to tell a story. They were able to showcase something. And again, the showing is believing. And for the first 1.5 years, we are doing a lot of this experimentation. We were not productionizing anything, but that was okay with us. But again, as time went by, we realized that we have to shift the gear. We have to understand what it means to just stop experimenting and start focusing on value. So for the next 1.5 years, we actually pivoted. We talked about how we have to change our mindset from being just experimenting to identifying, bubbling up the right use cases, focusing on what is important, and use those lessons learned from experimentation to start providing real value outcomes. And when we started building those real value outcomes, we saw the real challenges. You talked about data readiness. You talked about the operating model. You talked about the scalability, adoption. You talked about the real ROIs. And we stumbled upon those challenges too. And as we stumbled upon those challenges, we tried to understand whether it is a technology problem, whether it is an adoption problem, whether it is a responsible problem in terms of ownership. And we started mitigating a lot of those. So over a period of time, now if we look back, we did the right approach, in my opinion. We didn't just go ahead and start saying, hey, we are not going to start, or we are not going to enable anybody to use generative AI unless you really provide a value. No, we said, don't worry about the first initial phase. Just experiment. Just get yourself comfortable. Just ensure that you are technology aligned. And then over a period of time, we learned our lessons. We brought in business. We got the right buy-ins. And again, we organically grown into what and how we can deliver values. So if you look back into those 5 years, it has been a very incremental journey for us. And now when we talk about business process automation, when we talk about augmentation, when we talk about identifying those key functional capabilities within an organization and look into those from the lens of automation and augmentation, we understand what it takes because of how the journey has been propagated for us. Long story, Ben, again, to your point, yes, now the important bits are ensuring that we are not just stuck into that POC, or we are not just looking into experimentation. We are not getting stuck into that mindset, but the journey had to start somewhere. And the journey for us started 5 years ago. And now it's all about value. It's all about looking into as a company and saying, what are those important things which are making us lose time, which is making us lose money or growth opportunities. So now we are looking into generative AI opportunities from the lens of saving time, making money, or growing as an organization. So again, to reach that particular milestone, it was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of technology adoption from my team, and it was a lot of business alignment that we worked together with.
Yeah, and I love the fact where you say now it's about creating value, because We're going through a transformational period now, isn't it, with businesses? And if you've got every business department coming to with you with a use case, you can't do it all, can you? You need to be choosing the one that's going to make the biggest ROI or the biggest impact for your business right now. You can't be doing everything.
100%. And I think that's a shift change to your point. But we couldn't have just talked about value from day one, to your point. But now, when we talk about how we are approaching generative AI, it's all about who is owning it. IT cannot own generative AI. If you give IT the responsibility of owning generative AI, they'll just focus on architecture, tools, and what is the right technology stack. And that is not the right measure of generative AI. Again, you mentioned it, and again, I think everybody understands it now. The real value of generative AI now is how is it transforming business? What is that underlying ROI? We are not just talking about automation because, yes, automation is a good measure, but in my opinion, it's all about augmentation first, which means can we identify those important low risk, high impact use cases? Can we find out those business scenarios where the augmentation and automation can work hand in hand and allow businesses to own solution that can reduce, for example, the effort, the time, or even FTEs, right? And when we start looking into generative AI use cases from the lens of what can organizations do, how the decision making can be made faster, how the decision making can be de-risked, those are the right measures to pick up generative AI use cases now. And that is how we are approaching it now. So again, the experimentation phase was important. Maybe it was important 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But now, with all the technology changes, with the way in which we are actually approaching generative AI, the way in which we should be approaching generative AI is business adoption and the ownership. And the ownership at any point of time at this day and age is all about business. How are they looking into business? How are they looking into augmentation and automation? And what business processes they feel comfortable augmenting with generative. So I think those are the right questions we need to ask right now.
Brilliant. So I guess most leaders feel pressure to do something with generative AI. In your experience, what separates organizations that from those that create value?
It's a multidimensional question, to be honest. And you're so right to point it out. So I've seen organizations where there is a lot of IT dependency. A lot of focus has gone into the CTO office where the intention is, do you have the right infrastructure? Do we have the right technology stack? What is that right technology stack? Can we set up the right technology foundation? And can we onboard business and allow them to come and experiment? And that is a methodology where a lot of companies have gone into. And for the last 2.5 years, they have been stuck into that POC. Technology is driving GenAI. There is no adoption. Business is trying to prove a value, but even if there are certain values that are getting proved, there is no adoption because it is not coming from the business. So what has happened right now is there is an organizational shift. We talked about change management. We talked about how it is an important management decision. So we're seeing and talking to a lot of our customers where we are educating them about strategic way of adopting generative AI. And that strategic way of adopting generative AI is business first. So we have to bring business and technology in the same table. We have to talk to them together. We have to talk to them about what value, like I talked about, as organizations. If we are looking into our organization and understanding why we are losing time, money, and growth opportunities, it has to come from business. And business can then tear down and tear up what kind of use cases they're looking into. And typically, again, technology can augment and help those decisions. They can help technologically to tear down and say, oh, in my tier one, I have these kind of use cases with their high impact, but these are high risk. In the middle tier, we do have those use cases where we can have pretty significant opportunities of growth. And we do not need high volume, high risk data. Or we can go into a tier three where the value of generative AI use cases might not be significant, but we are also not looking into significant risks. So again, it's a measure of what is that fine line, what as an organization we are comfortable with. A lot of time when we tear down and look into how we are going to position our use cases into these buckets and what does it mean to onboard a new project. And what does it mean to have ownership of the project in terms of outcome? But how does technology enable them through, like you said, data readiness, platform readiness, G adoption, ensuring that the right guardrails, the right responsible AI, and the safety nets are put in there. So again, technology will bring in those as an augmentation, but business is driving the value by identifying the right use cases, and technology can help them identify the right use cases in terms of risk profile. So once you do that, once you marry up the business and technology, then it becomes an easy, smoother ride. Then it becomes an aim of adoption. So you have seen it more than again in multiple ways. We have seen this multiple ways. A lot of time we have built brilliant, wonderful outcomes. We have built generative AI solutions that are cutting edge, but eventually we have seen no adoption. And if we do not have any adoption, eventually it becomes yet another experimentation, and it becomes yet another effort where the organization is not getting a lot of value out of it. So again, like I said, it's a combination, but to my point, what I was trying to emphasize was it is a function of business adoption, business ownership, augmented by technology enabled.
So I guess is there an early signal where this experiment is heading towards value rather than proof of concept?
Absolutely. And again, no, I come from a technology background. I can talk about how we have done it, right? So what we have done is we have created a framework and we call it a funnel framework, right? Again, the analogy is very simple. We have hundreds of ideas that actually come into our generative AI platform at any point of time. And out of hundreds of ideas, probably five of them actually go into production. So we have created that setup where we have project onboarding and we have the use case onboarding process, which means, we work with our CISO, we work with our legal team, work with our business to create a self-service form. We document and understand what use cases people want to bring in. And we allow our business to come and submit those forms so that business owners, they can actually justify and discuss what is their value, what they want to solve for. What we do internally is we have actually converted those business request forms into technology workflows. We work with our CISO, legal, our engineering department, and we start providing weightages to these kind of ideas. And these weightages actually convert to something meaningful. We can automatically bucket and tier those ideas. So we can automatically know if a particular idea is high risk, low risk, high value, low value, and we create a rubric. So if a particular project is worth investing on, it actually gets onboarded into something we call it as a fail fast sandbox. And it is very important, to your point, to have a concept of fail fast. So when we are differentiating ourselves from a technology point of view, is we do not want to get stuck in that feels new forever. So we have technology enablement. Now we think of building generative AI solutions through a common foundation. When we onboard a particular use case into that platform, we will automatically see whether that use case is going somewhere. If you are providing value, success, it's good. If not, we need to fail fast. We need to stop that buck right there. And we do that through assessments. We have functional assessments where it can be human in the loop, it can be experts. We have technical assessments where we evaluate scalability, cost. We look into responsible AI, biasness that comes out of the answers, the accuracy measures, the ground truth evaluations. We look into the FinOps. We look into the observability matrices. We look into all the logs and try to understand whether that particular idea that we are trying to prove in that fail fast sandbox, is it worth investing on? So it has become like a standard for us where we are not going to keep an idea into a sandbox, which we call it as a very fast sandbox for a long period of time. We have to prove the value out of it. And the value, like I said, is proven through technology assessment and human learning. And if we can prove that value, it goes into scaled ideation. That is where we can start putting in the bells and whistles. And we can convert that idea, which was a POC, into something more meaningful like an MVP. And then we hand it over to the hands of business for a very small period of time, again, shadow IT and all. So we want to ensure that we are restricting business to have a good look and feel into what we have built, because again, they are the owners. And in the skilled ideation phase, we are understanding whether the outcome is aligned to what the initial thought experiment was. And if it is, then again, we go through those entire assessment phase. And if everything looks good, then we start talking about pitching and putting into production throughout. So for us, it is a very stage gated process. There is a demand funnel. There is a fail fast sandbox where we try to establish value quickly. We do assessments, we do scaled ideation, we do reassessments, and then we decide whether it has to go into production. So it becomes a factory. And more importantly, we are continuously monitoring those factories, which means whoever is putting an idea into this funnel, whoever is talking about what is their business value, right to the assessments, the fail fast, the experimentations, the outcomes, everything is documented, tracked, traced, and evaluated. And we call that as a control plane. So our control plane becomes a 360 view of what ideas are actually onboarded into a generative AI platform, how these ideas are actually converted, evaluated, validated. So tomorrow, if there is a decision that we have to take to our ARB, saying, hey, we have gone through the entire hoops, we have actually an idea that we want to productionize, we can trace that lineage, we can understand what all this experimentation has gone in, what kind of scenarios you have tested, what is the value, what is the ROI, what is the cost. We can track every single thing in the entire journey, and that journey can now be converted into something meaningful and then put into production. So again, every organization, I'm sure, has their own process, have their own framework, have their own methodology of taking an idea into production. This is ours, but this kind of a methodology is important and critical. So instead of saying, how do we go ahead and put an idea into production, think through it from the lens of multiple stage gates. And for us, these stage gates is something that that has evolved through a lot of lessons learned. We also have been stuck into POC land for a long time. And now, over a period of time, as we're learning our lessons, this kind of a factory model has become a standard practice for us. And that is what we have been following for onboarding new ideas and productionizing it in a much more repeatable way.
Yeah, no, I like it again, like you said, they're repeatable. If you're constantly doing it, you're going to get results in a day because you're following the same process every time, which I love that. So then, as you mentioned around like adopting generative AI, so I guess when it comes to I guess that's the biggest misconception businesses have when they start adopting generative AI, and that would catch them off guard.
So again, when I've been talking to business internal and external, I've seen three kinds of ideologies coming through, right? So one is there are business who thinks that generative AI can be a silver bullet, right? So when we have talked to them and understood what kind of use cases do you want to focus on? And do you have a well-established process? Can we look into the documentation? Can we look into your existing process? So to augment, to reinvent your process, we have to understand your process. So where is your process? Who can help us understand and document those processes? Where is that tribal knowledge? People have been working on this process for 20 years. How are you getting it done? Is there a day in a life that we can actually focus on? Sorry. Where is the data coming from? What kind of data sources we are talking about? How ready is that data? And when we start asking these kind of questions, a lot of time businesses will come back with a very bland face and say, we have not thought about it. And we believe that generative AI can actually get everything done. We may or may not have all the processes established. We do not know where all the documentations are. We do not understand where our data comes from. We do not know how clean and how ready our generative AI use case data can be. But our thought is that is what generative AI is for. It's going to automatically fix all the broken things and come up with magical outcome. So I've seen people thinking of generative AI as a magic wand where it can fix things where people do not know what is broken. The other end of the spectrum is absolutely opposite, where we have gone and talked to our business partners and they are like, no, we are not going to adopt generative AI because every time I talk to you, you guys talk about augmentation. You do not talk about 100% automation, which means for them, it becomes a binary game. If people still need to invest some time as a human in the loop and look into the outcome generated by generative AI, for them, it is not good enough. They're like, oh, we still have people have been here for 20 years. They know the process in and out. We do not think generative AI can do anything about it. And it's going to be too much of an effort for us. Generative AI, instead of making our lives easier, it's going to add more work for us. So you have seen those kind of scenarios in the business where they are very apprehensive about changes. They feel that they are subject matter experts. And for them, generative AI becomes yet another tool and burden, which may or may not prove them value than they imagine it would. These are the two ends of the spectrum where either people think of this as a magic wand or people think of this as yet another tool that would add more chaos than value. So, as technology partners, I think what our biggest challenge is to bring these kind of discussions into a common board, talk about what is real, right? And the reality is, it is augmentation will come before automation. We will find out the right challenges. We might not automate everything. We can start with 60% automation, where a lot of these repeatable, redundant, manual things can be automated, and it can be just 60%. And it's okay to start with 60%, right? So the incremental value of generative AI, not everything is going to be fixed in day one. It takes some kind of an effort to get the data readiness down, platform readiness down. Technology is going to be an enabler, but somebody still has to define those processes. Somebody has to look into those business processes with a fresh sense and a fresh lens and say, all right, I see your business process. This business process is too cumbersome because we have been doing this for 20 years, but now with technology, we can actually streamline the process. We can fast track the decision making, right? So I think ensuring that we can bring people into the same mindset, giving them a true sense that it's going to be a very iterative journey. It's not going to be a magic one where in day one we can change everything. Data readiness is a thing. Understanding the business problem is a thing. As long as we are actually talking in the right sense, giving them the right approach and educating them about what exactly is going to follow, right? What is that 30, 60, 90-day program? How these 30, 60, 90-day program is going to show them the incremental value and how over a period of time, they're going to see a lot more value coming out of these initiatives. That is important because day one, if people are thinking that it's going to magically change the workforce or immediately show some ROI, I think that's a sticker problem. And it has happened not because of the organizational shift. I think that is in general, right? Generative AI is the first technology in my mind in human history where it has been personally adopted first, then be adopted in a corporate world, right? People have been using ChatGPT before they started building an agentic solution, which means the thing that I can ask any questions and get the right answer. So in their mind, generative AI was already something magical. So now that we are incorporating those things into a corporate world, understanding that it still requires a lot of work in terms of data, technology, adoption, business value, business process, it comes as a sticker shock for a lot of our customers.
So I guess who needs to own generative AI inside an organization? Is it technology, data, product, or the business?
Absolutely, it has to be a business. We talk about the fact that the accountability of generative AI use cases, it has to be on the use case level. It has to be on a business level. It cannot be just on committees. It cannot be just on technology enablement teams, right? If you put it in the hands of technology, they would just focus on the latest and greatest technology. They'll be running behind technology. They'll be talking about the right things to do in terms of technology adoption, but not ROI, not outcome, not growth. If you put it in the hands of data, it'll go into a rabbit hole where we talk about, is my data right? How do I get my data right? Now, what are the different reasons the data needs to be onboarded? How do you provide the access control, the security, and the whole nine yards of data governance? If you put it in the hands of products, they'll think of generative AI yet as another tool, right? Again, we talk about how we can just convert generative AI into a tool. So the right ownership has to be on business. Business has to drive the value. They have to own the value. And like I said, the data, the technology, and the product teams, they have to enable business. At the end of the day, it has to be business laws.
It's interesting. It's good to see. Going back to obviously looking at adoption again, you've got just security, risk, and ethics, often slow adoption. So how can you balance moving fast with being responsible without like paralyzing the organization?
That's a great question. Again, I hope that there is a clear answer to this. Every organization struggles with this. Even our organization struggles at time to line, understanding where to draw the line. But one thing is clear, Ben. One thing that is clear is we need to separate out the policy from permission. And that has worked for us. So what I mean by that is AI policies will evolve. We cannot just wait for AI policies to be mature before we productionize anything. In that case, we never productionize it. So in my mind, as long as we start with the right permissions, which means, are we picking up the right use case? Does the use case have the right data governance, the right data auditability that is needed? Are we not opening up too much data? From a permission point of view, when we are actually exposing the data through a generative AI use case, do the people have the right permission? Are there role-based access control, attribute-based access control, system-based access control? Who gets to access what kind of data? So as long as we are providing outcome with a need-to-know basis, as long as we are providing outcome with what is the bare minimum data we can actually synthesize and put it in the hands of whoever is seeking the data, we should be good. So again, what I was trying to put with this is it's important to have technology permissions being very robust and solid. That is the reason we talked about data readiness and technology enablement for business, which means when a generative AI use case is there, and this generative AI use case, for example, talks to 5 different systems, we need to ensure that the right permissions are in place for all these 5 systems. People can interact, access those 5 systems. And again, the minimal amount of data is actually propagated. Policy point of view, does organization have figured out all the AI policies? Probably not. Should we be waiting for all the AI policies to be in place before we can productionize? Not at all. So it's a fine line. So as long as we are talking about responsible AI incorporated into the design patterns, as long as safety is not an afterthought, as long as the right permissions and access controls are in place, and as long as we do have AI policies, which is still evolving, and we are continuously measuring, monitoring those AI policies, even though they are not perfect, should be okay. So I'm a firm believer where as long as we are providing the right answers, the right permissions, and as long as we are working with the right people within the organization, we talk about security and CISO, and forming those policies, we should be good. No, we should not just wait for something to become perfect, because in that case, we just chase our tails.
Have you seen teams that move too fast and pay the price for bypassing governance or compliance guardrails?
I've seen people doing that, and I've seen where organizations would have a very quick time to provide an MVP. They might actually move into an MVP phase way sooner than any other company, but eventually they'll get stuck in that MVP phase. They will not productionize things. And that is where we run the risk of shadow IT. I've seen many times where their AI policies, their responsible AI policies, their safety breaks, their security and governance there was nothing in place. They still pushed for creating those MVPs. And eventually the MVPs were a success from a business point of view, but nobody was giving them permission to go to production. So what happened was it became yet another MVP that was getting stuck in this shallow IT. Business was using those tools on a sporadic basis. It was never going into a production. There was no adoption, but then there will be small fragments, there will be small groups of business who are using it on their day-to-day basis because now MVP became a thing. So again, if you get stuck into this kind of a scenario where there is a shadow IT, nobody's making your asset or solution go into production, it's not an ideal thing. And when you talk about multiple use cases getting stuck in that MVP and the shadow IT grows and grows, it becomes a nightmare for an organization. So again, what we talk to our customer is very clear. Do not think about security. Do not think about AI policies as an afterthought. Always ensure that you have the right guardrails in place from day one. Your policies will mature. We'll come back and reframe some of the policies, but start with those permissions. Start with the policies that is approved, and ensure that we are not cutting corners in terms of governance, risk, and mitigation against.
Yeah, brilliant. No, I like that. And so then if, say, for a company listening today and they wanted to move from sort of Gen AI curiosity to real impact, say in the next 6 to 12 months, what would be your advice? What to prioritize first?
So I think it should be a dual velocity approach. Again, we talk about this many times. So we talk about there are 2 things that needs to happen in parallel. So one is from a technology point of view, think about building a common GenAI foundation. A common GenAI foundation are those repeatable, reusable, standardized, governed, and ready to monitor blocks that will ensure that if you're building one use case or if you're building 100 use cases, you have the common set of repeatable capability. So, for example, data onboarding, data readiness, semantic layer generation, your agents framework, your scaffolding, your responsible AI, your control planes, your governance, your monitoring, your testing framework, your adoption framework. All of these are repeatable and usable technology enablers where you can build them in a way that these are common across all these. So the most important thing that I go and talk to my customer is that dual velocity, where at the bottom part of dual velocity, you need to focus on these repeatable, reusable modules that makes generative AI adoption technologically faster and standardized. The other part of dual velocity is that business adoption, which means work with business in parallel. So again, the keyword here is dual velocity, the word dual, which means we are not waiting on technology to finish their work. We are not waiting on technology to start building their foundation. But at the same time, while technology is building their foundation, we need to ensure that there are right business owners. We work with our business partners, try to understand all the use cases that are important, critical within the organization, and we tier them up, right? Like I said, we find out which are those use cases that go into bucket one, bucket two, and bucket three. We try to provide value. So value realization, value evaluation of those use cases are very critical. And then while the technology enablement is there, we identify the top two, top three, right? Do not dilute your generative AI adoption. Focus on the top two, focus on the top three first. Find out those use cases which are maybe low-hanging fruits, maybe provide better value at low risk. And then just start incorporating, right? The worst thing that can happen to an organization is to wait on the side and hope things to standardize. Instead of that, just dive in. Dive in with some low risk use cases. Focus on those use cases. Do not dilute your portfolio. Do not go after 10, 20, 30 different use cases on day one. Find those 1, 2, or 3 use cases. Have a timeline. Say that in 6 months' time, I need to productionize it and have that buy-in from business and ensure that technology is going to support it. So as long as you're doing this dual velocity, as long as you're finding those right use cases, grooming those use cases, ensuring that these use cases are good to go, and technology is building those repeatable standardized framework and the platform, then if you combine them together, it becomes a solid way of solving multiple use cases. And in the 6 months period, when you build that solution, after 6 months, you now have created yourself a machine. You have created yourself a process where, the fourth and the fifth and the sixth use cases, they have no time to market because you already have a solid GenAI foundation. There are common, repeatable, standardized building blocks that are already in place. You already have the right engineering in place, and you also have the generative AI adoption process. Right? So to combine them together, like I said, through dual velocity, that becomes a building block. So again, are all organizations following them? Probably not. But again, if I have to provide 2 cents to anybody read through you or listening, in my opinion, it is kind of a dual velocity methodology, and everybody can find their own methodologies. But again, in my opinion, this kind of a dual velocity where think from repeatability, think from reusability, think from standardization from day one, and find out those use cases, have business own it, and deliver through technology is the one approach that has worked. And as long as we are putting those approaches in, like I said, 6 months to 12 months time frame, and ensuring that there is something tangible coming out of it, that's the right approach.
Brilliant. That's some great insights, and listeners listening will find that truly of value. And so I think we'll leave it there today. So Nayan, thank you for your conversation.
Thank you so much, Ben, for having me here. It has been an absolute pleasure. Again, thank you for all these insightful questions, and good luck.
Hopefully you're all finding these conversations useful. Please make sure you follow or subscribe Data Analytics Chat so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Data Analytics Chat Podcast. Subscribe to our channel for more stories and insights in data and career.